Midweek Pictorial, January 8th, 1920. The King of Siam addressing his troops on their return from Europe, where they had rendered excellent service on the Western Front. Especially in aviation had marked aptitude been shown by some of the Siamese officers. The King, Rama VI, is here shown holding a review at Bangkok, the capital, and addressing the troops from the royal pavilion. One of the impressive features of the review was the carrying in procession of the ashes of those who had died in the service. King Rama has occupied the throne for 9 years. He was educated at Sandhurst and Oxford. English mounted military police taking part in the funeral ceremonies of the late Cardinal von Hartmann at Cologne. Von Hartmann had been one of the bitterest opponents of the Allies, and had been active through the war in trying to enlist papal support on the side of the Central Powers. His funeral was largely attended. Gallery of Marly, one of the ex-Kaiser's former Potsdam residences, now transformed into an apartment. It is one more illustration of the rapid democratization of Germany. The ex-Kaiser had 60 palaces in various parts of the country when at the height of his power, and these are being utilized for popular purposes. Conference of delegates from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania gathered at Dorpat, Estonia, to discuss peace terms with representatives of the Soviet government of Russia. This earlier conference proved abortive owing largely to the arrogant tone of Litvinov, the Bolshevist emissary. Another one was called for December 21st, and is now in session. Both sides are weary of conflict, and it is expected that a basis of peace will be reached between the Baltic states and the Lenin regime. The former are expected to make their independence a sine qua non of the discussion, and no vigorous opposition to this is expected from Lenin, who is more interested in the spread of his ideas than in territorial annexation. The Baltic states have now secured the virtual expulsion of German forces from their soil, and with this disturbing problem removed, are looking toward the solution of social and economic problems. The regime of Bela Kun in Hungary was a bloody one. At first, there was an appearance of moderation as far as massacre was concerned, and the communists satisfied themselves with lootings and confiscations. But arbitrary power soon went to the head of those in control of Budapest, and murder became common. Prominent among the evil influences at work was the core of terrorists who gloried in the name of the Lenin Boys, and who sought to duplicate the ruthlessness that had characterized the Soviet regime at Moscow and Petrograd. Scores of citizens were proscribed and murdered with scarcely the form of a trial. The leader of the Lenin Boys was a certain Cherny, shown as the central figure in the picture at the right. The men surrounding him show the types of his followers. Some of them are now being tried for their crimes, and the Attorney General has a list of more than 500 murders committed by them. Many have sought sanctuary in Austria, which has so far refused to extradite them or their former master, Bela Kun. Lady Nancy Astor and her 6 children. From left to right are Phyllis, John Jacob, Lady Astor, Robert Shaw, Michael David, William, and Waldorf. Lady Astor has been elected to the British Parliament as member from Plymouth, after an exciting campaign that gave full scope for her remarkable powers of witty and brilliant repartee. General Pershing in the center of an enthusiastic throng of citizens, who welcomed him to his old hometown of Laclede, Missouri, December 23rd. The general has been feted in London and Paris and in the great cities of this country, but it is doubtful if any of these demonstrations gave him such unaffected pleasure as the greeting given him by his old friends and companions of his boyhood. To them he was Johnny. To him they were Charlie and Clay and Matty. An old-fashioned turkey dinner was one of the features of the day. An official welcome being given to General Pershing at Laclede, in front of his old home. Governor F.D. Gardner of Missouri is reading the presentation statement that accompanied the gift of a gold medal to the general from the state of Missouri. Citizens before General Pershing's home in Laclede, waiting for the general to finish his turkey dinner and come out to greet them. The neighbors of the general gave him a loving cup, and one of his old friends gave him 2 red apples. He spent most of the afternoon calling on old acquaintances, not forgetting Aunt Susan and old Negress, who had made him a fried dried apple pie. Decennial census of 1920, for which preparations are being made on huge scale. This operator punches holes in cards, each hole indicating the age, occupation, color, sex of each individual. Cards are then assorted and classified. A sorting machine in the Census Bureau, capable of assorting under 12 different headings 24,000 cards an hour. It also detects errors. This machine handles 420 cards a minute and records 60 different classifications. Results are tabulated on visible sheet. Shipping room of the United States Census Bureau, from which supplies are rushed to the 87,000 enumerators throughout the country. Italy's king, despite threats, goes to Parliament. The royal cortege drawing up in front of the Italian Chamber of Deputies at the opening of the 25th legislative session. Italy has been passing through a serious political crisis. The elections resulted in marked gains for the Socialists, who have 156 seats in the Chamber of Deputies. Some of the more extreme elements in the party openly talked revolution, and prior to the assembling of the chamber, it was freely predicted that the appearance of the king at the opening of the session would be the signal for the overthrow of the dynasty. The situation was made more serious by the desperate economic condition of the country, and the irritation engendered by the tangled fiume situation. It was gravely debated whether the king should not refrain from visiting Parliament in person, permitting one of the ministers instead to read the royal speech. But personal courage has always been the attribute of the House of Savoy, and the king braved the socialist threats. As a matter of fact, although the socialists left the chamber, no serious disorders occurred. Premier Nitti, awaiting the King of Italy, as the latter, braving threats against his person, attends the opening of Parliament. Vast crowd assembled before the royal palace in Rome on the occasion of the king visiting Parliament. The king appeared on the balcony and was greeted with enthusiastic acclamations. U.S. submarine S-16, as she appeared just after her launching at Bridgeport, Connecticut on December 23, 1919. She was built at the plant of the Lake Torpedo Company and is the largest vessel of her type in our Navy. Largest submarine in the American Navy sliding down the ways at Bridgeport, Connecticut. Despite the hope that great wars are no longer to vex the world, the building of engines of war continues. The submarines that are now being constructed for the United States Navy embody the latest lessons that have been taught by the war. The S-16 shown above is a formidable addition to our already powerful Navy. She is the largest submarine constructed in this country. She has a cruising radius of 12,000 miles, is 220 feet long, and will have a speed of 12 knots an hour submerged and 15 knots on the surface. Her crew will consist of 50 men. Her displacement is 900 tons. She will be armed with the latest and most approved type of offensive weapons. It is stated that under favorable conditions, she could go to Japan and back if necessary without refueling. Of all the great cities of America, San Francisco has been the first to complete its permanent tribute to the soldiers and sailors who fought in the World War. The beautiful Victory Monument here shown was erected April 22, 1919. Victory at the summit bears a laurel wreath to be conferred on the returning living and the glorious dead. On the four sides of the base are inscribed tributes, which are here reproduced. Mexican peons and election scenes in City of Mexico. Group of Indian peons, with bare heads, used as witnesses against American consular agent Jenkins. They are wholly illiterate, are readily susceptible to bribery or coercion, and their evidence needs careful scrutiny. The case against Jenkins, the American consular agent, whose arrest and detention by the Carranza government revived a short time since talk of American intervention, seems, in the opinion of American representatives who have investigated the situation, to be an exceedingly flimsy one. It rested almost entirely on the testimony of ignorant peons, who can usually be depended on to say just what those who have them in their power want them to say. Even if they were desirous of telling the truth, their low mentality and utter lack of education would make them like clay in the hands of an astute lawyer. They are reported to have testified that they saw Jenkins in conference with the bandits who afterward kidnapped him, the inference of course drawn being that the kidnapping was a matter of collusion. This has been vigorously denied by Jenkins himself, who furnishes facts that make the charges grotesque. The case has lost its acuteness for the present, because of the release of Jenkins on bail, furnished without his knowledge by a supposed agent of the Mexican government. President Carranza of Mexico, voting at open-air polling place at recent municipal elections in Mexico City. He went unescorted and without a guard of any kind. Seen in voting place at recent municipal election in the Mexican capital. The absence of police or soldiers will be noted. Men of the working class seem to predominate. Field Marshal von Mackensen, wearing Death Head's hussar uniform, receiving an enthusiastic greeting from Berlin crowds on his return from Allied captivity to the German capital. The field marshal was in Romania when the armistice was signed, and sought to return with his army to Germany through Hungary. His army was interned there, however, and he himself was made prisoner by the French. Later he was taken to Saloniki, and there released and permitted to return to Germany. The militaristic spirit shows strongly in the picture. Workmen clearing away debris made in demolishing the fortress of Küstre in Prussia. The demolition is made in accordance with the peace treaty, which prescribes that the fort must be dismantled in 2 months and demolished in 6. The German Iron Division in retreat from the Baltic states, which it had vainly tried to hold with the support of the Baltic barons and the secret connivance of the government in Berlin. Germans transporting airplanes from Mitau in the retreat from Courland and Latvia. The Germans, defeated utterly in the west, sought desperately to draw some benefit from the wreck of their military fortunes in the east. A large force had been left in the Baltic states under the command of General von der Goltz. The immediate return of these was not demanded by the Allies after the signing of the armistice, because it was thought that they might be of service to the general cause of civilization by helping to check the inroads of the Bolsheviki. It soon became evident, however, that these German troops were playing fast and loose with whichever side they thought would enable the Baltic barons to retain their grip on the Baltic states, and would further German schemes for the future domination of Russia. Foch then demanded that they should be disbanded and returned to Germany. German intrigue delayed compliance with this demand, however, and it was only as the result of a series of smashing defeats by the Letts that the Germans at last were driven back to Memel, from which they are reported to be returning to Germany. Little children of Vienna suffering from rickets, produced by lack of nourishing food. Thousands of such cases threaten deformity, incapacity, and early death. Famine stalks this winter over Central Europe, and nowhere is it more threatening than in Vienna. Dr. Karl Renner, the Chancellor of the shrunken Austrian state, declared in an interview a few days since that his country was on the very brink of despair, and that unless a supply of food were furnished by the Allied nations, thousands of his countrymen would inevitably die of starvation. The most pitiable feature of the situation is that the children are dying of malnutrition by thousands, while those who survive promise to develop into a deformed and sickly youth and manhood. Vienna is in an especially desperate condition, because the agricultural districts on which she formerly depended for the bulk of her supplies have been severed from her by the decree of the Peace Conference. These newly created states are themselves in great need, and feel it necessary to conserve their supplies for their own population. America has already done much, and is preparing to do more to relieve the situation, and the Allied peoples also are bestirring themselves to prevent a terrible tragedy. Vienna children in one of the factory districts lined up in front of one of the Hoover feeding stations. Conditions are such in Vienna that absolute famine threatens in a few weeks unless aid is rendered. Camp of Bulgarian prisoners in Serbia lined up for inspection. These men are being held to repair the devastation to bridges, towns, and industries inflicted by the Bulgarians during their occupation of Serbia. Evidence of strong monarchist and reactionary feeling was afforded during the recent visit of Hindenburg to Berlin to testify before the Committee on the Conduct of the War. A crowd is here seen before the residence of Helfferich, where Hindenburg was staying, urging him not to appear before the committee. Helfferich 1, Hindenburg 2, and Ludendorff 3, on their way to the Reichstag to testify regarding the conduct of the war. Everywhere they were greeted with great popular demonstrations. United States investigates Armenian conditions. City officials of the Armenian town of Mamekatun in the interior of Turkey, extending greetings to Major General James G. Harbord, head of the American mission to Armenia. Major General James G. Harbord and his colleagues on the commission appointed by President Wilson to investigate conditions in Armenia have completed their work and returned to Paris, where they are drawing up their report. It is the desire of the Allied powers that the United States should act as mandatory to Armenia, as this country is believed to be actuated by less interested motives than any other. Armenia badly needs help, but there is a strong current of opposition in the United States to our undertaking the task of mandatory. The President of the Armenian Republic, A. Katisyan, photographed with Major General Harbord in the garden of the Capitol building of the new republic. Armenia asks recognition by America. Group of Armenian deserters being brought into Yerevan, capital of the new Armenian Republic, by Armenian soldiers. The political and economic condition of this people, who have suffered so horribly at Turkish hands, is reported as deplorable in the extreme. Delicate work of building airplane propellers. Few processes are more skilled or technical than those of building airplane propellers. The nicest adjustments are required, as the slightest defect might cause the aviator's death. In the picture is seen the air screw built up in laminations glued and pegged together and ready for shaping. The propeller, as here seen, is nearly completed and is being subjected to the balancing test. Both blades must not only weigh the same, but must be of the same size and pitch. The test is to put a small nut into one of the bolt holes, and this must be able to pull the side down. Electrically driven shaping machine that attends to 3 air screws at the same time. The laminations can be clearly seen in the wood, the grains running in opposite directions to prevent splitting. Walnut is the best wood for the purpose.